Our second reading, Gospel of Mark, chapter 1, verses 29 through 39. You need to know that this refers to an event that occurs just after Jesus and four of his disciples leave a synagogue. That's a setting for this. In Mark it says, as soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. That evening, at sunset, they brought to him all who were sick or possessed by demons. And the whole city was gathered around the door. And he cured many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons. And he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. In the morning, while it was still very dark, Jesus got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for him. When they found him, they said to him, "Everyone is searching for you." He answered, "Let us go on to the neighboring towns, so that I may proclaim the message there also, for that is what I came to do." And he went throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons. The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Here in this first chapter of Mark, we have Jesus beginning his ministry. He's at Capernaum in Galilee. Maybe 1,500 people in the town of Capernaum, right there on the north edge of the Sea of Galilee, fisherman Simon's hometown. Think about that location. This is not some megachurch in Jerusalem, but some little old synagogue in Capernaum in Galilee. The verse ahead of what we read today, we learn it was a Sabbath day, and like good Jewish men, Jesus and his four disciples go to the synagogue. But it turns out to be no normal service. Jesus teaches. People are astonished by Jesus' teaching, and even more astounded by his exorcism of an unclean spirit from a man, a spirit who claims to Jesus, "I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus tells him, "Be silent," and the spirit obeys. Now, how would you like to have been at that service? I bet when you got home, you'd share what happened with the whole family and everyone else you could find. You would tell everyone, you wouldn't believe what I saw in the synagogue today. No wonder Mark says at once his fame began to spread throughout. But they leave the synagogue, but the day is not over yet. Jesus and his four disciples are leaving the synagogue, a public place for men, going into a private home, a private place where women and children would be present. It's the home of Jesus' first two recruits, Simon and Andrew. Jesus comes barging in with his male entourage that included not only Simon and Andrew, but another set of brothers, James and John. They are probably still on a high from the amazing experience in the synagogue. Then Jesus is told that Simon's mother-in-law is in bed with a fever. We can interpret from the fact that she remains unnamed that in Mark's opinion, she was just an ordinary woman. Only a few women deemed important by Mark are mentioned by name in his gospel. Jesus' response should astound us. He was so bold as to defy all cultural norms and to take her by the hand. A practical action to help her, a connection of touch that results in healing. Touch is important. Later, Jesus will take the hand of the daughter of Jairus, take the hand of the epileptic boy. Touch means healing. Also, the verb raised up is used in the healing stories across the Gospel of Mark. But here we have the healing of Simon's mother-in-law as the first healing. We could call this the first resurrection story in the Gospel. Now, lest you think that Jesus just was healing the woman so that they could expedite getting dinner served, we need to consider the meaning of this phrase, to serve. Now, on the most literal level, it may mean that she gets up and prepares and serves food, as would have been the tradition of the day. But the verb to serve is another key term in Mark's gospel. In this case, her service is a model response to faith. Put this in the same category as the angels in the wilderness who serve, and the women who follow Jesus and are critical to serving him. Quoting Mark himself about Jesus, served epitomizes his own ministry. Mark says, "For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." This is not just reestablishment of traditional gender roles. Simon's unnamed mother-in-law is an icon of Christian ministry. She served the Lord. But the day is not over yet. Well, actually, in timekeeping of that era, the day was over at sunset, but the story continues. The Sabbath, with its prohibitions, particularly on moving about, has ended. And the next element of the healing story begins. The people were respecting the Sabbath sacredness by bringing their sick and possessed at sunset, which marked the beginning of the next day. They brought their sick and possessed with the expectation of healing, just like for the mother and for the man in the synagogue. Now, it's like a hyperbole when Mark says the whole city gathered around the door, but Jesus' response to it is clear. He cured many who were sick and cast out many demons. Again, he would not permit the demons to speak, even though they knew his true identity. You should be asking yourself, why? To answer that, let's first summarize. Jesus is in the beginning phase of his ministry. People are beginning to mob Jesus, and it all begins at the home of Simon and Andrew, just as the Sabbath ends. Jesus obliges the crowd by healing many and casting out even more demons, yet he still desires to keep his identity under wraps. To do this, he makes sure that the demons disclose nothing, likely for two reasons. First, he does not want them, the demons, to have power over him and his path, power that through identification of him they would have. Second, he was afraid that an early recognition of his messiahship would compromise his ministry. By withholding full understanding of his true identity, he avoided the enticements of popularity verbalized by Satan in the temptation stories in Matthew and Luke. Here, even his own disciples are yet to really fully understand. Although in a clumsy way, Mark, in telling the story this way, wants us to know that Jesus is something more than just a healer or an exorcist, but not all recognize him for who he really is. All of the story is important. Again, but because the events happen not because the events happen in some important, prominent place in front of important people, just the opposite. The first display of Jesus' true self is both hidden and revealing. The demons are silenced because they know his significance. And where were they silenced? Where did this take place? At the door of a humble home of a mother-in-law in a backwater city where the sick and possessed just kept showing up. Here at sunset of the day, in a lowly city in Galilee, the very gospel of God has come to the people. We have one more section of our text, and most scholars would interpret this part of the material towards the end of our reading as a summary section. Mark actually likes to offer summaries at various points in his gospel, usually as a way to signal where the action is going to shift, but also to highlight the general acclaim and response that Jesus is receiving. In this particular passage, Mark wants to highlight just one more thing about Jesus, the newly identified healer and exorcist, who aims to be both hidden and revealed. The next thing Jesus does is steal away and pray. We are told early in the morning, Jesus leaves the house of Simon and Andrew and goes to a deserted place to pray. In Mark, Jesus prays like this just 3 times. Here, at the healing of the 5,000 in the Garden of Gethsemane. But clearly we know prayer is a part of Jesus' spiritual practice. Highlighted prayer, like in this passage, seems to point to watershed moments in Jesus' ministry. After what is described as an intense search, the text says everyone is looking for him, Jesus is found. He is fresh out of his time of prayer. Perhaps he is refreshed in his spirit by his prayer. He announces his purpose is to proclaim. Here's a summary. Jesus, grounded in his deep relationship with God, announces that it is time to go to all of Galilee and preach, exercise, and heal. When the people of Capernaum want to put him in a box in his just healing ministry, he tells the disciples that it is time to move on, the better to preserve his calling to preach. Well, it's all well and good that we understand the setting and the context of this text and some of the implications for the time when this occurred. This is doing our exegesis. But it is also important to identify the considerations for this from this text for our time. What does it mean for us today? I would share with you 4 possible things identified by Osvaldo Verbena. First, we need to learn to avoid the allure of popularity. The celebrity syndrome is engraved deeply in our culture today. Just look at Kelsey and Taylor. This is made evident by our media, by our social media, widespread use and perceived importance of those media. Reports, even speculations of what they may say or do profoundly affect people's actions. The looking for the affirmatives, likes, and follows seems endless. Jesus could have stayed in Capernaum and become a local superhero, using the addressing of people's problems for the purpose of self-aggrandizing. He could have been a media star of the day. He certainly could have had the most likes of anyone. But he decided to move on for the larger good. Avoid the lure of popularity. Second, we should accept limitations. Just briefly, note Jesus healed many. Even Jesus did not heal everybody. Accept our limitations. Third, we need to find our own deserted place in order to re-energize and charge our spiritual batteries. It is vital part of our ministry and good antidote to the cult of personality to intentionally recharge our spiritual batteries. Lastly, we need to focus our ministry on those who will not be able to repay us. In doing so, we should avoid the danger of using their needs as a way of self-aggrandizing. God's preferential care for the poor is written all over the New Testament, and our challenge is how to serve the poor without using it as justification for our personal agendas. 4 learnings. Avoid the lure of popularity, accept our limitations, take time to recharge, and give preferential care to the poor. In summary, Amos Wilder reminds us that these stories do not only provide us with information about the past, but promise to engage our present lives and shape our future as people of faith. Perhaps the special character of all the stories in the New Testament lies in the fact that they are not told for themselves, that they are not only about other people, but that if we listen, there's always something about us. This story from Mark ends with Jesus going throughout all Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons. In case you missed it, so far in the Gospel of Mark, Mark tells us that the feature attraction consists of a young Jewish rabbi who has come not to draw a crowd or perform stunning miracles or to rewrite Jewish history and tradition. He has come to preach and to cast out the demons in people and to show us how to deal with systems that diminish or distort that gracious love of God. Mark invites you to pay attention to the whole story, because here the feature attraction has only begun. Amen.